Welcome, everyone, to another deep dive. And when I say welcome, I mean I am speaking directly to you.
Right, to the listener.
Exactly. The learner. You are the kind of person who constantly hungers for a more profound understanding of the mechanics underlying our universe.
And more specifically, the architecture of your own mind.
Yeah, you want to bypass the impenetrable academic jargon. You want to get straight to the insights.
The multiple perspectives.
Right, the core philosophical frameworks that actually shift paradigms. And today, we are examining a truly exceptional manuscript.
It's titled 35, The Subtle Fetters.
And it's essentially a psychological map of human consciousness. It attempts to trace the final, really microscopic obstacles preventing ultimate psychological liberation.
But what makes this manuscript so unusual is its methodology.
Yeah, the blend of traditions is wild.
It weaves together the ancient psychological framework of Eastern Buddhist philosophy with the esoteric symbology of Western alchemical traditions.
Which you wouldn't think go together naturally.
No, but the synthesis of those two traditions creates a remarkably highly resolved map of human cognition.
So our mission in this deep dive is to isolate and examine these subtle fetters.
We are looking past the obvious behavioral dysfunction.
The gross fetters.
Right. And we are venturing into the invisible, deeply ingrained patterns of attachment that our own minds cultivate.
These are the traps that sophisticated thinkers fall into. Practitioners, individuals dedicated to self-improvement.
People who believe they have already optimized their mental frameworks.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we even approach the philosophical arguments, there is a striking piece of esoteric artwork provided alongside the source material.
It serves as a visual legend for the entire map we are about to explore.
It really does. At the very bottom of this image sits a heavy, dark crescent bowl.
It visually communicates density.
Yeah, density and gravitational pull. It looks like unrefined matter. But emerging right from the center of that dark mass is a delicate, pristine, white spiral thread.
And this thread winds its way upward, actively resisting the gravity of the crescent below it.
Right, and as the eye follows it up, the thread connects to these intricate, crystalline geometric shapes.
Flawless diamonds and interlocking triangles.
Suspended in pure, white, negative space.
What's fascinating here is how that visual semiotics perfectly mirrors the trajectory of cognitive refinement the authors are detailing.
The journey upward.
Yes, that dense crescent at the foundation is the gravity of the gross fetters.
It represents an awareness entirely captured by sensory existence.
Bound by basic biological imperatives, cravings, and aversions.
And the delicate white thread.
That is the observer's consciousness. It's actively separating from that dense matter and refining its own perception.
So those balanced geometric diamonds at the apex represent ultimate realization.
Exactly. A state of consciousness completely purged of cognitive distortion.
So today, we are following that thread. We are moving out of the heavy matter and examining the final, nearly transparent threads of attachment that must be severed before a mind can reach that crystalline clarity.
But we have to establish the baseline of where this upward journey truly gets difficult.
Right, the starting point of the subtle work.
The framework introduces the concept of the 10 fetters, or Sahyonayana.
And these are divided into two distinct categories, right?
Yes, 5 gross fetters and 5 subtle fetters.
And the gross fetters are entirely outwardly oriented.
They encompass our attachment to the external sensory environment.
But the subtle fetters, which are our primary focus today, belong exclusively to the internal, subjective experience.
To contextualize these subtle fetters, we first have to establish the psychological profile of the individual encountering them.
Right. Who is actually doing this work?
The manuscript designates this specific stage of development as the Anāgāmī.
Which translates conceptually to the non-returner.
Yes. An individual at the Anāgāmī stage has completely eradicated the 5 gross fetters.
Meaning they operate with zero attachment to sensory phenomena.
None.
I want to pause on that because it is incredibly difficult to conceptualize. We aren't just talking about someone with really good impulse control.
No, it's not a behavioral suppression.
We are talking about the complete deactivation of the brain's dopamine-driven reward prediction errors regarding external stimuli.
Exactly. An Anāgāmī encounters a highly stimulating environment and experiences no craving.
No psychological pull at all.
The fundamental desire to interact with the world as a sensual being has simply evaporated.
It is a radical psychological baseline. I mean, because they have shed those heavy sensory attachments, the gravity of the ordinary human experience no longer holds them.
However, the subtle fetters remain.
They are not entirely free.
Right. They have not eradicated the internal conceptual clinging to existence itself.
Because of these remaining cognitive taints, the Anāgāmī is still bound to the cycle of rebirth.
But the framework insists this rebirth occurs exclusively in a non-sensory refined state of existence.
A heavenly realm.
A Brahmaloka. And it is in this refined environment that the final subtle fetters are guaranteed to dissolve.
Resulting in full liberation. Arahantship.
Precisely.
So they have essentially tested out of the sensory environment, but they haven't graduated from the overarching construct of existence.
They are just operating on a higher, purely mental server.
And this is where the integration of Western spiritual alchemy becomes incredibly useful as an explanatory tool.
It maps perfectly.
The manuscript maps the psychological state of the Anāgāmī to a specific alchemical phase.
The correspondence is surprisingly exact. In alchemical terminology, the Anāgī stage aligns with the albedo phase.
The creation of the white stone.
Right. The albedo phase is defined by the transmutation of base reactive metals into silver.
And symbolically, silver is intrinsically tied to the moon.
It represents reflectivity, the cooling of the passions.
A deep connection to natural, balanced cycles.
But the authors make a crucial philosophical distinction about what is actually happening in this albedo stage.
The work of the practitioner, up to this point, consists of optimizing their behavioral and cognitive patterns.
What the text calls the skillful use of karma.
This optimization creates profound tranquility. From the outside, the practitioner appears to have achieved ultimate healing.
But the manuscript argues that this is not ultimate healing at all.
It is merely a return to systemic balance.
That distinction is paramount. Achieving balance is not the same as achieving liberation.
Right.
It maps directly to the 11th stage of spiritual alchemy, known as multiplication.
In the multiplication phase, the alchemist might reintegrate into a community.
Because their internal system is so highly regulated and harmonious, they can function flawlessly within the world without being corrupted by it.
The manuscript acknowledges that, for many, the journey effectively pauses right here.
The alchemical stone is only half completed.
It's white, not yet red.
But it is highly functional. The individual possesses what are described as subtle taints of holiness.
And their passive trajectory guarantees that refined rebirth and eventual liberation.
But the process of reaching that albedo phase is fraught with psychological paradoxes.
Yeah, there's a historical anecdote about Sariputta that perfectly illustrates this.
One of the most prominent figures in the ancient Buddhist tradition.
Right, he was a practitioner of immense intellect and dedication, yet he found himself completely stuck.
He couldn't even breach the initial stage of realization.
Stream entry, or sotapanna.
And the diagnosis for his failure is a brilliant piece of psychological insight.
The texts suggest he failed to progress precisely because he was exerting too much effort.
The strain of his ambition.
The absolute desperation to achieve a spiritual milestone became the very cognitive block preventing it.
It is a perfect demonstration of ironic process theory.
Right. The harder you try to suppress a thought, the more prominent it becomes.
The harder you try to force a realization, the further you push it away.
It's spiritual performance anxiety.
You see this in high-level creatives and athletes all the time.
Exactly. The moment they stop trying to force the outcome and just allow the mechanics to work, the breakthrough happens.
And that is exactly how the anecdote resolves.
Once Sariputta relinquished that white-knuckled grip on his ambition, the realization unfolded naturally.
He purportedly achieved all 4 progressive stages of enlightenment in a single period of sustained contemplation.
Just a massive leap overnight. But then we get to the aftermath, which is where I have to push back a little on the framework's internal logic.
Let's hear it.
So to silence the skeptics who doubted his sudden leap in realization, Sariputta supposedly levitated and flew into the assembly hall.
The manuscript uses this to point out that displaying psychic powers, or iddhi, does not prove enlightenment.
It merely proves mastery over physical laws. But logically, if someone transcends physical reality to the point of literal levitation...
Wouldn't that imply they have completely mastered their subtle mental fetters as well?
Yeah. Why does the framework draw such a hard line between bending reality and achieving enlightenment?
It is a vital separation. The framework views mastery over the physical world, even to the point of miraculous manipulation, as just another technical skill.
Interesting.
It is a highly advanced manipulation of the gross fetters and physical elements, but it is still an operation occurring within the construct of conditioned reality,
So you can learn to manipulate the code of a simulation perfectly.
to the point where you can fly within it.
But that doesn't mean you have unplugged from the simulation.
Exactly. Eradicating the subtle fetters is about unplugging entirely. Flying is just a magic trick of a highly concentrated mind.
It does not require the eradication of the subtle underlying desire to exist.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. You can be a wizard within the Matrix, but you are still in the Matrix.
Which transitions us perfectly into analyzing the exact nature of those subtle matrix bindings.
The first of the 5 subtle fetters is bhavaraga, the fetter of becoming.
This is where the inquiry moves from the gross, external world into the invisible architecture of subjective experience.
Bhavaraga is the deeply ingrained, often subconscious attachment to the state of being.
It is the existential momentum of the mind.
The specific form of existence is almost irrelevant, isn't it?
Completely irrelevant. It is the craving for continuation that defines this fetter.
We experience the gross manifestations of this constantly. It is the psychological mechanism that always places fulfillment in the future.
I will be content when this project is finished.
I will relax when the weekend arrives.
But for the Anāgāmī, this mechanism becomes incredibly subtle.
Because they are completely detached from sensory rewards.
But they know they are destined for a refined, heavenly rebirth.
So the trap becomes the subtle anticipation of that refined state.
They are still leaning forward in time.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the danger of bhavaraga becomes clear.
The framework posits that at the dissolution of the physical body, it is precisely the subtle craving for continuation that generates a rebirth-linking consciousness.
This microscopic thread of desire acts as the foundational algorithm that compiles the next iteration of existence.
So the Anāgāmī must locate the exact point where this craving for the future arises in their cognition and dismantle it.
And as insidious as the desire to continue existing is, the second subtle fetter is its exact mirror image.
And honestly, the mechanics of the second fetter are far more counterintuitive.
It is vibhavaraga, the fetter of annihilation.
If the first fetter is the drive toward becoming, this is the profound craving for unbecoming.
It is the desire for total non-existence.
This fetter frequently traps individuals who have endured immense psychological or physical trauma.
When someone has utilized intense suffering as the fuel for their developmental path, the desire to simply exist, bhavaraga, is often easily discarded.
The exhaustion of suffering makes the concept of annihilation incredibly seductive.
They just want the processing to stop.
But wait, if a practitioner realizes they are just short-circuiting their brain, who is doing the realizing?
That points to an even deeper trap. I always assume that to achieve an empty mind, a calm mind, you just allowed thoughts to cease.
But the authors argue that the very concept of ceasing is a cognitive illusion.
It is a sophisticated illusion. The mind is a generative engine. It does not possess an off switch.
Therefore, to experience what it believes to be nothingness, the mind must actively construct a conceptual framework of nothingness.
And then it must expend massive amounts of cognitive energy to hide its own observational presence from itself.
It is a systemic paradox.
The mind is working overtime to simulate a state of zero activity.
Exactly. The emptying process is highly active.
A mind that imagines it has ceased functioning is simply a mind completely absorbed in maintaining this simulation of cessation.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Because the manuscript explores the absolute logical extreme of this specific cognitive error.
It describes a scenario where a highly disciplined practitioner forces their mind inward so intensely that all perception seems to completely halt.
But because this is a forced suppression rather than true insight, the result upon physical death is rebirth into a highly specific, abstract condition.
The realm of the non-percipient beings, or asanyasata.
The asanyasata realm is conceptualized as an environment of ultrafine matter, where beings exist in a state of total motionless suspension.
They are described as statues frozen in time.
It's a purely abstract mental domain, but within the framework's logic, it is structurally real.
When you think about this in modern terms, it is exactly like a computer caught in an infinite while loop.
The system is powered on, energy is flowing, but it is locked in a recursive error.
Fundamentally doing nothing.
Paralyzed in time. And the duration of this state is horrifying.
The manuscript suggests these non-percipient states last for epochs longer than the lifespan of an entire physical universe.
It is the ultimate manifestation of vipavarāga.
But the critical flaw is that it is impermanent.
Eventually, the immense cognitive force required to maintain that universe-long suppression degrades.
The while loop breaks.
And when it does, the being falls out of that non-percipient state and is immediately reintegrated into the lower, sensory-driven realms.
They endure a universe-long pause, only to wake up with the exact same unresolved, subtle fetters.
I want you to examine this mechanism in the context of your own psychological habits. Consider your preferred methods of cognitive avoidance.
When you are overwhelmed by the data of existence,
And you engage in hours of mindless scrolling or binge-watching or whatever mechanism you use to shut your brain down.
you aren't actually resting.
You are engaging in a micro-iteration of vipavarāga.
You are expending energy to temporarily short-circuit your perception.
It is the same recursive loop, just operating on a smaller timescale.
That is a highly accurate parallel. And recognizing that mechanism forces us to look deeper.
Who is the entity desiring the cessation?
Who is the entity comparing the current state of suffering to a desired state of peace?
This brings us to the third subtle fetter, the architect of both becoming and annihilation.
Mana, traditionally translated as conceit.
Now we have to recalibrate our understanding of the word conceit.
In common parlance, conceit implies arrogance or narcissism.
But the authors define mana much more foundationally. It is not merely believing you are superior to someone else.
Mana is defined as the fundamental cognitive act of measurement and comparison.
Whether you evaluate yourself as superior, inferior, or exactly equal to another, you are actively deploying mana.
The very act of comparison requires a fixed point of reference.
And that fixed point is the construct of the self.
This is where the psychological analysis becomes incredibly sharp.
Because for the Anāgāmī, who has abandoned sensory desires and achieved immense internal balance, mana presents a uniquely difficult hurdle.
Because of their profound clarity, they naturally exude authority.
They're likely experiencing significant success or reverence from their community.
They are fundamentally different from the baseline human, and they know it.
And the instinctual trap for a spiritually advanced individual in that position is to cultivate humility.
But the framework explicitly identifies humility as just another manifestation of mana.
Let's break down the psychology of that, because spiritual narcissism is a massive blind spot. How does the ego hide behind self-deprecation?
When an individual actively practices humility, they are operating from a dualistic framework
They are internally acknowledging their elevated status or insight.
and then making a conscious performative choice to lower their self relative to the other.
The entire operation reinforces the existence of the I that is choosing to be humble and the you that is being elevated.
It is a deeply relational comparison.
It validates the solid, separate ego just as strongly as arrogance does.
It is essentially the ego putting on a disguise.
Look at how remarkably small I can make myself.
The focus remains entirely on the self.
So the objective is not to become perfectly humble, but to completely dismantle the cognitive measuring stick that makes either arrogance or humility possible.
This raises an important question. If the mechanism of comparison and self-reference is completely annihilated, what dictates the individual's behavior?
How does a human operate without an egoic reference point?
The manuscript's hypothesis on this is fascinating.
It suggests that when mana is eradicated, the individual's actions become entirely pure and consequently utterly unpredictable.
Most human behavior is highly programmable.
We can predict how a person will respond to a threat, a compliment, or a social pressure because we know they are operating on scripts designed to protect or elevate their self-concept.
When you remove the self-concept, you remove the scripts.
The individual no longer calculates the social or personal ramifications of their actions.
They respond to the immediate reality of the moment with zero distortion.
The authors use an analogy of living like a tourist.
When you are a tourist in a foreign city where no one knows your history, you have no social standing to protect.
You aren't entangled in the local hierarchies or dramas.
You are simply observing and interacting without attachment.
The text extrapolates this to the ultimate degree. Without a fixed self to protect, the existential fears lose their traction entirely.
Disease, poverty, death.
None of it registers as a threat to an identity. Take a moment to audit your own cognitive load today. Consider how many of the decisions you made,
How you modulated your tone in an email.
the opinions you withheld in a meeting,
The clothing you selected.
were subtly dictated by the algorithm of mana. How much of your brain's processing power is dedicated purely to calculating your position in the relational hierarchy?
The sheer volume of energy consumed by that background application is staggering.
And when that application is finally uninstalled, the freed cognitive energy is immense.
This leads us into the deepest strata of the framework.
We are moving past the relational concepts and diving into the raw mechanics of consciousness itself.
The final two subtle fetters are uddhaka, which is restlessness, and avijja, primal delusion or root ignorance.
The progression here is like peeling an onion. We started with the gross fetters, the external skin of sensory attachment.
We peeled down to the subjective desires for existence and non-existence.
We peeled further down to the conceptual self that makes comparisons.
Now, we are at the very core. We are no longer dealing with concepts. We are dealing with the baseline operational frequency of the mind.
Let's examine the engine of cognition, which in this tradition is termed citta.
The fundamental mind state or consciousness process.
Uddhaka, restlessness, is described as an intrinsic feature of any unwholesome citta.
It is the baseline hum of agitation that exists whenever the mind is not perfectly aligned with objective reality.
You see, its macro manifestations in states of anger or anxiety.
But at the subtle level, it is simply the inability of consciousness to rest in its own nature.
It is a constant microscopic vibration.
But that vibration is not spontaneous. It has a power source.
And that power source is the final, ultimate fetter. Avijja, primal delusion.
Avijja is the root error in the operating system.
It is the deeply seated ignorance that generates conditioned reality.
It is the engine that continually produces the karmic forces, ensuring that one moment of consciousness relentlessly sparks the next.
It is the architect of the entire cyclic structure, from the grossest sensory cravings to the most refined desires for heavenly rebirth.
So we have a self-perpetuating engine built on a fundamental error, constantly vibrating with restlessness.
How do you dismantle an engine from the inside while it is running at maximum capacity?
The framework provides two distinct operational methodologies.
The first approach is jhana, which refers to states of profound meditative absorption.
In jhana, the practitioner concentrates their cognitive force to such a degree that they effectively overpower and suppress the restlessness.
It creates a highly controlled, incredibly still mental environment.
However, the authors are careful to point out the limitation of this approach.
The stillness of jhana is temporary and dependent on the maintenance of that intense concentration.
It suppresses the symptoms, allowing for clear observation, but it does not rewrite the root code of the primal delusion.
To rewrite the code, the practitioner must deploy the second methodology, vipassana.
Or insight meditation.
And this is not the popularized, relaxing mindfulness of contemporary culture.
This is an aggressively active, continuous cognitive inquiry.
You are essentially running a diagnostic program against every single micro-moment of perception.
The framework insists this inquiry must utilize three specific analytical lenses: sunyata, anicca, and dukkha.
We must carefully unpack each of those lenses. Let's begin with sunyata, emptiness.
This is not a nihilistic void.
It is the precise observation that no phenomenon, external or internal, possesses an inherent, solid, independent essence.
Every thought, every perception is a composite arising dependent on other factors.
It maps beautifully to modern cognitive science, specifically the understanding of the default mode network.
The self is not a physical structure in the brain.
It is a continuously generated narrative.
Applying the lens of sunyata means catching the brain in the act of generating that narrative and realizing that the narrator is a phantom.
Precisely. The second lens, anicca, impermanence, applies to the temporal dimension.
The practitioner observes that reality is not composed of static objects or states, but of processes in a state of continuous flux.
A thought arises, peaks, and dissolves in milliseconds.
When anicca is truly perceived, the mind realizes the futility of clinging to anything because there is nothing solid to grasp.
And that leads inevitably to the third lens, dukkha.
Which is often translated as suffering, but is perhaps better understood as fundamental unsatisfactoriness.
If everything is empty of inherent essence, sunyata, and constantly dissolving, anicca,
then any attempt to derive permanent security or identity from these phenomena is structurally guaranteed to produce friction, or dukkha.
the application of these three lenses is relentless.
The practitioner watches the siddha, watches the microscopic restlessness of uddaka arise, and instantly dissects it with insight.
It is a grueling process of deconstruction that culminates in sudden, paradigm-shattering realizations that finally break the engine of Adhija.
It sounds like an incredibly violent psychological event.
You are systematically dismantling the very architecture of your own subjective reality.
This brings us to the culmination of the map.
The phase transition from the Anāgāmī to the Arahant, the fully realized being.
If we connect this to the bigger picture and return to our alchemical symbology, this transition represents the transmutation of the white stone, the albedo, into the ultimate achievement.
The red stone, or rubedo.
The rubedo signifies the complete synthesis of all dualities and the permanent eradication of all impurities, both gross and subtle.
It is the realization of the flawless geometric diamonds suspended in clarity.
The manuscript outlines two distinct trajectories for this final transmutation.
The active path and the passive path.
The active path involves the intense, continuous application of the Vipassana inquiry we just discussed.
The authors note that because of the immense cognitive and metabolic demands of this sustained analytical state, the practitioner typically requires robust physical health.
It is an endurance event of the highest order.
Furthermore, the text suggests that upon achieving arahantship via this active route, the structural reality of the individual is so profoundly altered that integrating into baseline society becomes essentially impossible.
They almost universally enter a monastic environment, which functions as the only viable societal container for a consciousness devoid of all relational and survival-based attachments.
But it is the passive path that contains one of the most provocative and complex philosophical assertions in the entire manuscript.
The authors present a piece of traditional lore stating that an Anāgāmī progressing passively will inevitably reach full arahantship.
However, once that ultimate realization occurs, the physical body will invariably fail,
resulting in death within 7 days, unless they immediately enter a monastic order.
At first glance, it sounds like a mythological curse.
The price of ultimate knowledge is immediate biological termination.
But a deeper philosophical reading reveals a profound commentary on the relationship between consciousness and biology.
I want to spend some time debating this, because it touches on the very nature of why we exist in physical forms.
The manuscript does not view this 7-day expiration as a punishment.
It frames it as the recognition of inevitable progress.
What is the mechanism there? Why does the psychological release of the subtle fetters trigger biological collapse?
Consider the biological imperative. The human organism is an immensely complex survival machine.
Driven by craving, aversion, and the deep-seated desire to continue existing. Bhavaraga.
The body and the subtle cognitive fetters are deeply intertwined.
As the passive practitioner naturally approaches the end of their biological lifespan, the failing of the physical system naturally loosens the gravity of the gross world.
It is as if the hardware failure forces a software update.
As the biological drive to survive weakens, the consciousness is granted a vantage point to finally observe and release the subtle attachments to becoming.
Exactly. The physical death acts as the catalyst for the final realization.
Alternatively, if the realization occurs while the biology is still viable, the system encounters a paradox.
The consciousness no longer possesses the algorithms required to maintain the biological survival drive.
Without the subtle fetters of desire, aversion, and self-concept to animate the body's actions in the world, the biological system simply ceases to function.
Unless it is placed in an environment like a monastery where survival requires zero egoic engagement.
The body is sustained entirely by the momentum of karma and attachment.
Once you sever the very last thread of that attachment, the engine just quietly powers down.
It is a stunning conceptualization of liberation, which brings us fully back to the visual architecture we started with.
We have traced the complete length of that delicate ascending white thread.
We observed its origin down in the dense gravitational pull of the dark crescent.
The realm of the gross fetters, driven by dopamine, sensory craving, and baseline survival.
We analyzed the Anāgāmī pulling themselves out of that density, achieving the albedo phase of immense balance and cognitive cooling.
And then we mapped the invisible hazards waiting in that highly refined space.
We dissected the paradox of Bhavaraga, the subtle momentum of existing.
And Vibhavaraga, the dangerous cognitive illusion of annihilation and forced short-circuiting.
We examined the pervasive architecture of mana, realizing that every relational comparison, even performative humility, is a reinforcement of the ego construct.
And finally, we looked at the core engine.
The restlessness of uddaka, powered by the root error of avijja.
And the meticulous, relentless methodology required to decompile that code until consciousness locks into the crystalline perfection of the rubedo.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner?
Immersing yourself in theories of universe-long cognitive loops and biological termination upon enlightenment can feel abstract, even alienating.
But the utility of this map does not require you to be actively pursuing arahantship.
The value lies in the resolution of the diagnostic tool it provides.
By understanding the extreme endpoints of these cognitive mechanisms, you can identify their subtle operations in your daily life.
When you notice that your baseline state is one of slight, persistent agitation, waiting for the next moment to arrive.
You are observing uddhaka and bhavaraga.
When you catch your mind actively constructing a narrative to justify checking out and avoiding reality.
You are observing the mechanics of vibhavaraga.
When you detect the micro-calculations your brain performs to ensure you appear sufficiently humble in a group setting.
You are catching mana in real time.
The ultimate liberation might be a distant geometric diamond, but the act of simply observing the threads of attachment is an immediate, profound elevation of your self-awareness.
A framework like this is a lens. When you apply it to your own perception, the chaotic data of your internal experience resolves into recognizable patterns.
And once a pattern is recognized, it leases its unconscious authority over your behavior.
I want to leave you with one final, deeply paradoxical thought to process.
We have spent this entire deep dive establishing that any desire for a future state, any craving for becoming, is a subtle fetter that guarantees continued entanglement.
It is the very algorithm that compiles the prison. So I ask you to consider this. Is the intense, burning desire to achieve ultimate enlightenment, to reach that state of crystalline clarity and perfection, simply the final, most sophisticated manifestation of Vavaraga?
Is the ambition for liberation the very trap that prevents it?
We will leave you to deconstruct that paradox on your own. Thank you, as always, for engaging with these profound concepts and taking this deep dive with us. Keep questioning your frameworks, keep observing your cognition, and watch out for those subtle fetters.